sticky notes. You had to stop. You like, I know that's not what I see.
I saw it, I caught something earlier.
You like,
it really comes to life.
intimate. I love her creative. For real. It's super creative. Super creative.
I love it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, she's not coming yet. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Merry Christmas. I was stabbing by a wife who she put her shit over. She like, what's going on? She like, I like that. I like that. Thank you.
There's a detail in this case that was never meant to be public. A detail that the people who were there that night never talked about on camera. A detail that his family found out not from investigators, but from a stranger. And when I tell you what it is, you're going to understand why millions of people refuse to let this case go. But I can't tell you yet. Because to understand what that detail means, you first have to understand who Tyrone Davis Jr. was before that cabin. Before that Christmas. Before the call that changed everything. Because here's what no one is saying out loud. The version of events being told publicly doesn't add up. And I'm going to show you, piece by piece, exactly where the story breaks. Stay with me. Because the truth of what happened to Tyrone Davis Jr. is more disturbing than the headline. And it starts not with his death, but with the last video he ever posted. He was laughing. That's what gets people. You scroll back through his content. His older sister calling him out, his kids on his lap, him hyping up his followers at 2 a.m. like they were all sitting in the same living room, and in every single frame he's laughing. Not performing. Not curating. Actually laughing. The kind that comes from somewhere real. Tyrone Davis Jr., known to millions online as Dro, built his platform the way most people can't, by being exactly himself. No filter. No brand strategy. Just a man from the streets who figured out that authenticity was the rarest thing on the internet, and he had it in abundance. His family said it best. God made him different. He walked into rooms and something shifted. Not because he was loud, though he could be, but because he was present. Fully, entirely present with whoever was in front of him. He was a father. He was a son. He was the nephew his aunt called a shining light. He was the brother who left voice messages that people saved for years. He was building something, a business, a brand, a future, and every person who watched him knew it. They were watching someone becoming. And then he went to a cabin for Christmas. And he never came home. Here is what we know for certain. Tyrone Davis Jr. and his girlfriend, a woman his family refers to publicly as Lulu, traveled together to a cabin rental for a Christmas holiday getaway. It was supposed to be romantic, festive, private. The kind of trip that content creators sometimes take before the end of the year, a reset before the new one begins. What we also know is this: something went wrong at that cabin. There was an argument. And at some point, for reasons that depend entirely on who you ask, Tyrone ended up outside. Away from the cabin. Away from the car. Away from anyone who could help him. And that's where the story fractures into two completely different realities. Because according to Lulu's account, Tyrone asked to be let out of the car. He needed space. She waited. She drove to a gas station. She gave him time to cool off. That's her version. But here's what his aunt said on a live video that was watched by hundreds of thousands of people within hours of being posted. She said Lulu called Tyrone's mother, his mama, Renee, and told her he fell at a gas station and bumped his head. Now hold that thought, because you need to feel the weight of what comes next. When the Davis family arrived, when they got to wherever Tyrone was, he was not someone who had bumped his head and needed stitches. He was brain dead. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Not a fall. Not an accident someone survives and jokes about. The kind of injury that changes a family forever in the span of a single phone call. And the aunt said it plain. That did not happen from falling out of a car. That did not happen from falling downstairs. Something happened to Tyrone Davis Jr. that night. Something that left a mark on his skull that a stumble at a gas station cannot explain. So now we have two things sitting in the same story that cannot both be true. A man who asked to get out of the car to cool off. And a man found with blunt force trauma to the back of his head. Both things cannot be true. But both things are part of the same account. Here is where this case stops being sad and starts being something else entirely. Think about what it means to change a story. Not embellish it. Not forget a detail. Change it. There's a specific reason someone changes a story, and it's not because the truth is complicated. It's because the truth is dangerous. The aunt's words cut through everything. Your story changed. She wasn't emotional when she said it. She was precise. She laid it out like a timeline on a whiteboard. First the story was one thing. Then it was another. And somewhere between those two versions of events, her nephew was on the ground with trauma to his skull that nobody was explaining. What happened next shocked even people who had been following the story closely. Tyrone's body was found under a bridge. Not at the cabin. Not at the gas station. Under a bridge. On Archer Road. On the side of the road. Like someone had left him there and driven away. And I need you to sit with that for a moment, because the implications of that location are something investigators and the family were not prepared to reconcile with the story they'd been told. If Tyrone got out of the car to cool off, if this was simply a couple's argument that escalated and he needed air, how does a man end up under a bridge? How does someone who stepped out of a vehicle to collect himself wind up not at the gas station, not on the road nearby, but beneath a bridge on Archer Road? Distance, location, time. None of it lines up. And his family knows it. They said it without hesitation. Something foul happened to our nephew. This was not an accident. This was not a fall. Something happened at that cabin, or in that car, or on that road, that the official story refuses to account for. Now here's the part that nobody in mainstream media has touched. Where is the police report? Not the rumor of a police report. Not the social media speculation. The actual, documented, filed police report from the department with jurisdiction over that area that investigated the death of a man found with blunt force trauma to his skull under a bridge during the Christmas holiday. Tyrone's family has publicly stated they don't have answers. They can't get clarity. They've been given fragments, changing fragments, and they're being asked to grieve quietly while the questions pile up. That silence from official channels is its own kind of answer. When a case is clean, when the facts are straightforward, information flows. Families get reports. Medical examiners share findings. Departments make statements. The machinery of accountability moves even slowly. When a case is not clean, when something in the record creates liability or exposure, that machinery stalls. Requests go unanswered. Calls don't get returned. Families are left standing in hospital corridors with nothing but a cause of death and a story that keeps changing. Tyrone's family is standing in that corridor right now. And here's what I keep coming back to, the thing that separates this case from every other tragedy that gets 48 hours of social media attention and then disappears. The people who love Tyrone are not grieving quietly. His aunt got on a live video with hundreds of thousands of people watching and she did not cry. She laid out the facts. She named the inconsistencies. She asked the questions that investigators should be asking in a room with Lulu, not on a social media livestream. And the reason she did it publicly is because she knows what happens when black families grieve privately. Nothing. Nothing happens. The case gets a number. The family gets a pamphlet about victim services. And the person who was the last one with their loved one goes on living their life while the family buries someone they'll never stop missing. She wasn't going to let that happen. And so she put it in front of millions of people and she said, look at this. Look at what they're telling us and look at what we found. Tell me this makes sense. It doesn't make sense. And now I'm going to tell you something that the initial coverage missed entirely, something that, once you hear it, reframes everything about the hours after the argument. Lulu called Renee, Tyrone's mother. She called her. Before the family found out he was injured. Before they knew where he was. She called Tyrone's mother and told her a version of events. Think about why someone does that. Think about the psychology of that call. You don't call the mother of the man you were just in a fight with unless you're trying to control the narrative before someone else does. That call was not concern. That call was preparation. Because if Tyrone had simply gotten out of the car, if this was simply a man who needed space and something terrible and unrelated happened to him after, you don't call his mother with a specific explanation. You call 911. You call the police and you say, I don't know where he is, I'm scared, I need help finding him. That's what someone innocent does. You don't call the mother and explain a fall at a gas station. You only explain a fall if you're trying to preemptively explain an injury. And here's the detail that was never meant to be public. The injury wasn't consistent with a fall. The family said it. The aunt said it specifically, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Not the front. Not the side. The back. Which means whatever caused that injury, it came from behind. You do not fall backward onto your head from tripping at a gas station. You do not sustain the kind of trauma that puts a man in a brain-dead state from stumbling off a curb. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull is a specific kind of injury. It has a specific profile. And investigators, if they're doing their jobs, know exactly what causes it and what doesn't. The The question is whether anyone is making them do their jobs. Now I want to talk about what Tyrone's community did in the hours and days after his death, because it's one of the most remarkable things to come out of a case that has very few remarkable moments. Within hours of the story breaking, his followers mobilized. Not to speculate wildly. Not to form an online mob. But to demand exactly one thing: information. Official, documented, verified information from the people with the legal authority to investigate what happened to a man found dead under a bridge. They created tribute threads and simultaneous accountability threads. They cataloged the timeline as it was being reported in real time. They flagged the inconsistencies before any news outlet had even picked up the story. They were doing what a functioning investigative system should be doing, and they were doing it because they understood that without pressure, there would be no investigation worth the name. Because here's the painful reality of cases like Tyrone's. When a black man dies in circumstances that are ambiguous, when the death happens in a private space with limited witnesses, when the person who was last with him has a changing story but no prior record, the bar for suspicious enough to investigate seriously gets raised in ways it wouldn't be raised for other victims. His family knows that. His followers know that. Which is why they're not letting this fade. Which is why months later people are still asking, what happened at that cabin? And I want to be honest with you here, because this case requires honesty, not performance. We don't have the official answers yet. We don't have a confirmed police report in the public domain. We don't have a statement from law enforcement that confirms or denies the family's claims about the nature of the injury. We don't have a charging document or an arrest. What we have is a family's testimony that contradicts the girlfriend's account. What we have is a location, under a bridge, that contradicts the story of a man who simply stepped out of a car. What we have is an injury profile that Tyrone's own family says does not match the explanation they were given. And we have silence from the people with the power to answer the question. That silence is the case. That silence is the story. Because in the absence of official information, the family is the only source of truth available to the people who loved Tyrone. And what they're saying is consistent. It's specific. And it's devastating. His aunt said something during that live that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She said that her nephew loved that woman unconditionally. That no one could have treated her better than he did. That he wasn't performing it for social media, it was who he was, every day whether cameras were rolling or not. He dressed well. He showed up. He loved his kids. He took care of the people around him. He was that guy. And the implication hanging in everything she said, the thing she didn't have to say out loud because everyone watching already heard it, is this: he gave everything he had to loving this woman. And he ended up under a bridge. There is a kind of grief that doesn't have language yet. The kind a family feels when they're mourning not just a person but a betrayal, when the death of someone they love comes wrapped in a story that doesn't make sense, told by the last person to see him alive, while officials are silent and the body is already in the ground. That's where the Davis family is living right now. In that grief. In that fury. In that space where sorrow and rage share the same breath and neither one can fully exhale. His older sister posted a tribute to him. She called out his hustle. His business. The goals he was stacking one by one. He had just encouraged her publicly, told her he was proud, told her to keep going, keep making the goals bigger than the last ones. That was the voice of a man building toward something. That was not the voice of a man who was finished. And now she's the one being told to stay calm. To wait for the process. To trust the system to tell her what happened to her brother. A system that, so far, hasn't said a word. Here is what I believe the investigation needs to answer. And these are not accusations, they are questions that the evidence as reported publicly demands. What is the official cause of death as determined by the medical examiner, and does it align with blunt force trauma to the back of the skull as described by the family? What is the timeline of Lulu's calls and movements between the argument and the moment Tyrone was found? How did Tyrone end up under a bridge on Archer Road, and how far is that from the gas station she mentioned? Were there any witnesses, at the cabin at the gas station on Archer Road, who were interviewed by law enforcement? And if there was a fall at a gas station, where is the security footage? Those aren't unreasonable questions. Those are the baseline of any competent investigation into an unexpected death with inconsistencies in the account of the only witness. If investigators have answers to those questions, they need to share them with this family. If they don't, the question becomes why not? Because here's what true crime cases have taught us, not just as entertainment, not just as content, but as a study of how accountability works and fails in this country. The cases that get solved are the ones where someone refuses to let the questions go unanswered. They're the cases where a family member goes on a live video with hundreds of thousands of people watching and lays it out plainly. They're the cases where the public applies enough pressure that the machinery of investigation starts moving again. Tyrone's family is applying that pressure right now. The question is whether anyone with a badge is listening. And now I want to come back to something, because I promised you at the beginning that there was a detail that was never meant to be public, and I've been building toward it the entire time, and here it is. The family found out the location of Tyrone's body not from law enforcement, not from an official notification, not from the investigator assigned to the case, from a stranger, from someone who had no formal role in this situation, who encountered information that should have been communicated through official channels, and who made sure the Davis family knew where Tyrone was because no one with the authority to tell them had done it. Think about what that means. A family searching for answers about their loved one. A system that should be giving them those answers. And a stranger doing the job the system failed to do. That is not a side detail. That is the architecture of this entire case. That is why Tyrone's aunt got on a live with hundreds of thousands of viewers. That is why the comments won't stop. That is why people who never met Tyrone Davis Jr. feel personally invested in whether or not someone answers for what happened to him. Because when the people who are supposed to protect you don't, when the system that's supposed to speak for the dead goes quiet, the only thing left is community. The only thing left is noise. The only thing left is people refusing to look away. Tyrone Davis Jr. deserved better than what he got at the end of that Christmas trip. He deserved to come home. He deserved to post the New Year's video his followers were waiting for. He deserved to watch his kids grow up and see his sister hit every goal she's stacking. He deserved the truth of what happened to him to be told plainly, by people with the power and the obligation to tell it. That hasn't happened yet. But here's what I know about cases like this. The truth has a way of surfacing. Not always through official channels. Not always in the timeline families deserve. But it surfaces. Because people like Tyrone's aunt don't stop. Because the followers who built their community with him don't move on. Because the questions don't disappear just because no one in authority is answering them. The pressure doesn't stop. And neither do we. So here's what I'm asking you to sit with tonight. Not as a viewer, not as a passive consumer of a story, but as someone who understands what it means to love a person and lose them and be told a story that doesn't add up. At what point does silence become complicity? At what point does a family's public accounting of a broken story become the only accountability that exists? And what does it say about the systems we trust with the weight of life and death that a stranger on a social media live video is doing more to demand answers for Tyrone Davis Jr. than the institutions with the legal authority to deliver them? I don't have clean answers. This case doesn't have them yet. But what I know is that Tyrone Davis Jr. was not just a case number. He was a father and a creator and a son and a brother and the person his nieces and nephews called when they needed the realest opinion in the room. He deserved better. And his family deserves the truth. If this case moved you, if you believe that Tyrone's story deserves to be told and retold until someone with a badge is forced to answer the questions his family is asking, share this. Leave a comment. Say his name. Because the algorithm doesn't care about justice, but people do. And the people who love Tyrone are counting on the people who never met him to care enough to keep the pressure on. This case is not closed. Not even close.